uh, uh, no, I didn't finish this show. I watched this show the proper way, getting to the start of season 3 and saying, no, I think that's enough, actually. How the Mighty Fall and the Seven Deadly Sins was on its way to being pretty mighty. I feel like people usually forget that this show at the start was hyped up in a very similar way to modern day blockbuster shonen like JJK and Demon Slayer. Maybe not quite to those exact levels, but this was a go to recommendation for many new anime fans to get a taste of shonen battle power fantasy. But wow, did it go off the deep end! My friend Jeff actually somehow managed to sit through the whole thing. I had him explain to me how this show ends, and I swear to God, I was going to punch him in the face to make him shut up. There was no way he was telling me the truth. He must have been bullshitting me. But he was! He was telling the truth! He also left me with a message to share with you all. Tell the people to never make my mistake. Do what Colin did and drop the show partway through. And I'll agree, I will stand by the first season or two-ish of this show being a pretty good time. I really like the premise of these powerful entities being built up by myth and legend, indirectly being the thing that allows them to stay in hiding so well. A lot of the characters have great chemistry, like Meliodas and Ban, or Escanor and, well, everyone. Escanor is just kind of the GOAT and was done so dirty by this series. And beyond the characters, the world felt very real and magical, plus the threats of demons attacking this world and the Sins being the only hero strong enough to stop them, so the same demons possess people in power in order to turn the citizens against the Sins to push them away. That's genuinely interesting storytelling, and feels very organic and well thought through, but this tale just falls apart the longer it goes on. The threats outgrow the relatively cramped world they inhabit, the character interaction takes a backseat to weaker and weaker action scenes, and the power scaling is beyond reprehensible. The Dragon Ball Z scanner was used as a bit to prove how irrelevant numerical power levels are, but this show just said, nah, this person is exactly this strong, therefore they must win. And look, I haven't even touched on the animation, we all know how that went by the time they hit season 3. This thing just took itself too seriously and way too far. It could have ended on a good note and been a solid, memorable time, but when the reward for your viewers sticking it out through over 100 episodes is the most convoluted garbage imaginable, frankly, it's only as high as it is because I wasn't the one who watched it all. Thank you for your sacrifice, Jeff. We'll always remember you. As opposed to the Seven Deadly Sins doing character assassination in the later stages, this show opts for assassinating all of its characters in those later stages instead. Spoilers for how this show about assassins leads to characters dying, by the way. Akame ga Kill has a killer opening, fitting of its name. Immediately, you feel as caught off guard as the main character forced into this world of assassins and conspiracies when having to learn all about how the intricacies of this world play out when death is just around the corner for every individual. There's magic, there's advanced technology, and there's zero plot armor as we learn not that far into the series. But therein lies the biggest problem for Akame ga Kill. Having no plot armor makes it really damn hard to grow attached to anyone. And by the time you reach the show's climax, you grow well aware of the fact that it's not just a couple characters being killed off for emotional beats or shock value, nor is it just the bad guys who fall victim to the forces of good. It's everyone's heads on the chopping block. By the end of this show, after starting with dozens of unique, prominently featured characters, we are left with 2, one of whom is heavily suggested will die a few months after the show ends. Akame is the last one standing in this whole mess, and she's basically the worst choice for that because she is so boring. I cannot tell you a single thing Akame contributes to the story aside from having a sister and killing things. And that first one isn't even that notable for her arc, if you can even call her muted range of emotions and characterization an arc. Yes, the title is accurate. Akame sure does kill, but like, so did everyone else, and they were a lot more interesting than her. The flamboyant Chad, the Gatling-toting tsundere, hell, even this bland-as-bone main character are all much more compelling than Akame. When she ends up being the only one left, it feels like a clear-cut loss, even if the good guys did technically win. I'm harping on this issue so much because it's the thing that brings Akame Got Killed down so low for me. Without this slaughterhouse plot, the show is fine. Animation is solid, with excellent action sequences sprinkled in, and the emotional facet of some of those early character deaths actually hits pretty hard, because they're used sparingly. The music employed by the show is bold and feels diegetic in many instances, though slightly out of place in others. And like I said, I did enjoy the characterization of many of these soon-to-be victims. But, man, look, Leone was the final straw. At the very end of the main conflict, where even the main villain and the main protagonist have both perished, Leone is one of the other good guys actually still standing. And what does she get as her reward for being one of three main characters to make it through this whole conflict? She gets shot in the back by a side character. I'm sorry, a professional assassin who has outlasted superhumans and weapons designed by the gods of wars themselves, not ensuring her target is dead, only to be shot from behind by a pistol, is a level of suspension of disbelief that I simply do not think is possible to reach. This pissed me off more than most things I've ever witnessed on television. Skip this show, if not just for the fact that they did my girl dirty. Fuck, man. I enjoy Yuri. Man, that sentence never sounds right coming out of my mouth. I think there's a certain stigma, a fair one, of straight men viewing lesbian content in a purely sexual way that makes me feel uncomfortable talking about these types of shows as genuine pieces of artistic media. Especially when said show is Citrus, a show that has a romance beginning with our main girl's new stepsister, surprise making out with her in the shower against her will. Yeah, it's literally a porn plot. I can't even defend that shit. But I will do my best to discuss Citrus as more than just sexual content, because there is an interesting story to be told here. The reason I enjoy Yuri, no, still doesn't sound right. It's because I feel it's easy to get burnt out on romance that plays through the same plots over and over again, which is what happens with many romance anime between a guy and a girl. Not to say there aren't some fantastic romance series out there that feature a male and female lead, but just that there's more junk to wade through before finding the good stuff. Yuri and Yaoi, in my experience, tend to have more interesting variations on tropes, and even more so, tend to shy away from the tropes we all find too common in romance. But not Citrus. Now, this is the first time I have said this so far in this series, but I do believe that the manga for Citrus is better than its anime adaptation. Are we gonna add a counter for that? I'm a strong believer that people who say one medium is always better than the other are just biased, and you really need to work on a case-by-case basis. With Citrus, the manga feels paced more at the speed one would want to see this romance play out, whereas the anime feels like it keeps throwing you into scenario after scenario just to get through as much of the story in 20 minutes that it can. Basically, the source material treats its story and characters with a little bit more respect and grace, whereas the anime, kind of feels like bait for those who just want to see two girls making out. Which is fine, that kind of content deserves its own brand of recognition, but just as a story, the Citrus anime feels incomplete, and not just because it's been over 5 years and there hasn't been a season 2. I also find this show to look a bit ugly, which the manga definitely does not. I'm not sure if that's just something about the character models or the colors, but a lot of it feels really weird on the eyes. Compare this shot from the anime with its counterpart from the manga, and you'll maybe get an idea of what I mean. If there was a key reason Citrus ranks so low on this list, it's because Citrus was actually one of the first manga series I actively followed while it was being published. I didn't read a lot of manga until just a couple years ago, and I was always an anime person. Seeing the story build toward its conclusion and then continue to get expanded content was really satisfying as I grew more attached to the characters and their complicated relationships. Complicated to say the least. So when an anime was announced, I was excited to get my first experience of seeing a manga I followed being adapted. And ultimately, I was just disappointed. It didn't feel the same. I wouldn't go as far as to say Citrus is a bad show. Well, I mean, maybe depending on the mood I'm in, I would. But overall, it's just kind of alright, and I personally had hoped for more from this adaptation. Luckily, there's another Yuri later on this list that blew me away when I watched it not too long after Citrus. So I wasn't too down in the dumps about how this one panned out for long, but you'll have to wait several videos before we get to discuss that one. Look forward to it. Okay, so let's make something clear here from the outset. No, Inferno Cop is not a bad show by most standards. However, please understand that in no world could I put a show like this, a show that is essentially animated paper puppets with a bare bones plotline meant to incite little more than shock factor, up in the echelons of shows like Full Metal Alchemist or Legend of the Galactic Heroes. No one would ever take me seriously again. So I kind of have to rate this for what it presents, and frankly, what it presents is adequate. I do really want to stress I have very few problems with this show. As a series you can complete in 45 minutes, it's a fun way to spend your time, and I love the sucker punch of Studio Trigger going from Kill la Kill to this of all things, and it's still being recognized as a core piece of their history. It's humorous if you're into the kind of what the fuck am I watching sort of genre. It knows what it is, and it plays into it better than most other shows that try to be parodies or deconstructions or whatever. Inferno Cop is just Inferno Cop, and we gotta appreciate it for what it is. On a list of best anime of all time, though, yeah, I'm not suggesting this to an anime newcomer and expecting a lifelong anime fan to emerge. I'm expecting weird stares and for them to question everything they think they know about me, which is valid. Hey, how about that? Two of these suckers back to back. Much like Inferno Cop, this series' best perk is how bingeable it is. Unlike Inferno Cop, it's really cute. This show follows an office worker who marries a big old nerd and the life they forge together. It's very much a traditional odd couple story, though structured around the otaku and geek culture that many of ourselves find we are entrenched in this day and age. A great aspect about this show is that it doesn't feel like it's poking fun at either of its leads. It would be so easy for this show to lean into the LOL weebs are so weird and quirky angle, or the this pleb doesn't understand otaku culture, I must educate them angle. But it doesn't do either. It poses these two with their own hobbies and interests and goals and flaws, and they work with each other on those things like an actual married couple should. I'm not saying this is the most realistic marriage ever depicted in animation, not by a long shot, but the wholesome growth you get to witness these two develop alongside one another into marriage and then into parenthood is just truly sweet. And that's just it. This show is short, sweet, and overall beautiful.
よく年頃の娘がお父さんと私のパンツ一緒に洗わないでって言うよね。あれはお父さんが娘と同じパンツを履けばいいんじゃね？あわよくば娘に自分のパンツを履かせられるんじゃね？
All right. Can we go to the next one, please? Thank you. This placement perfectly emphasizes that just because a show is longer and higher ranked than the shows I listed before it does not make it better material. I would gladly rewatch Inferno Cop any day over rewatching The Irregular at Magic High School. This show is just an isekai power fantasy, but instead of another world, it's set in the not too distant future. Magic is real, apparently, and the government wants to make sure it can keep an eye on as many budding magic users as possible, so it makes magic school. Now, the key point of that description is the government involvement, because if you take that out, it sounds really generic. Kids at Magic High School, so what? But the hook really of this show is the conspiracies, the terrorism, the ever-looming threat of international magic warfare. It does a good job at bringing the show up to feel more mature and give it a flavor all its own. It's just a shame that our protagonist is boring as fuck. Oh my god. Tatsuya, for plot reasons, literally does not have emotions. He can smile and comfort others when the plot calls for it, but they make sure to let you know he's just imitating what emotions he sees on other people. In fact, the only emotion he has, and I'm not reading subtext here, this is straight up on the wiki, is love for his sister. And when I say that, I mean the kind of love that results in them getting engaged in the second half of the story. The incest is wincest is strong with this one. Miyuki is so down bad for her brother that it becomes her only character trait. It's insufferable, not just because it's blood-related incest, but because it's incest with no chemistry. The show tells you that Tatsuya loves his sister, but it really comes across like he knows the effect he has on her and uses it for his benefit without ever planning to give her what she wants. Until I guess later on he reveals he's wanted it all along too. When they're around each other, the plot grinds to a screeching halt so that Miyuki can hype up Tatsuya and so he can say something nice in return that makes her blush. It's so sad that this unearned relationship takes away from what could otherwise at least be a decent show. That is, if the plot meandered less and was paced well and the other characters had any impact on the plot, or if the animation didn't suck sometimes, or if I remembered anything that happened. It's a bad show. It's frankly too high on this list, but when I look at the numbers, I think it's accurate. Maybe it could be a little lower, just a bit, but I think it still belong here in this grouping of 10. The shows that came before, some of them I hate, or they're butt ugly, or the music is atrocious, or I forget I even watched them in the first place. The Irregular Magic High School is just a show that exists. Good premise, bad execution. I think this show is a good reminder that this list is not flawless and the system I've devised here has room to improve. But I stand by that this show belongs in this spot as a recommendation. I would tell someone to try this show before I tell them to try out something like Ergo Proxy or Citrus or Food Wars. I think this is a better early anime than a lot of those others, and probably better than some that might even be higher on this list, depending on who you ask. Now, if you're like me, and have watched 200 of these bastards, what the fuck are you doing watching me still talk about this dung heap? Go on, get out of here, this isn't for you. I wish I understood why this trend of in another world I became a insert inanimate object here became so popular. Or even if it is popular, I don't know, do people actually regularly watch these? I catch one every once in a blue moon because I feel like anything more would basically be asking for me to go into each subsequent one with a poor mentality. Reborn as a Vending Machine is one of those shows that I started watching on a whim, and I mean, gee, what is there to say? Nothing really stands out as far as isekai go. I guess I like the world setup that they do with everything being floors of a dungeon, but Sword Art Online did that too. I like the colorful cast of characters from various races and classes that have unique strengths and capabilities, not that we haven't seen that in shows like Overlord. I think the stakes feel genuine a lot of the time, and there are creative solutions tied to the main character's unique anatomy, just how I liked that same aspect in Shield Hero. You see the point I'm getting at here? These kinds of shows are just hard to explain why I do or don't like them, because I feel like for anime fans, we know before we even hit play on episode 1 what's going to happen. And while I would not consider the Vending Machine Isekai an unenjoyable show, it's simply an amalgam of every other isekai I've seen. And this does bring up an interesting perspective to consider. Had I seen this show before all those others I just mentioned, Would I have enjoyed it more and found those shows derivative of it instead? I'm not sure. All I can say is that Reborn as a Vending Machine is a lighthearted, fun watch that does a stellar job of highlighting a very niche aspect of Japanese culture. That's my 5-second pitch. The vending machine quote-unquote power-ups are the best part of the show in my eyes. They're creative, and for the most part, they make sense with the laws of the world. I do wonder how long such a story can maintain a presence once the novelty has run dry, but as is, if it sounds like fun, watch it. At the very least, it probably puts more care into its unique mechanics than other similar isekai, though I could just be prejudging shows based on how silly becoming a sword or the goddamn flu might be. Hey, let's go ahead and just add one to the counter right now. Cells at Work was one of those really cool lightning in a bottle kind of concepts. I mean, yeah, Osmosis Jones did it first, but Cells at Work did a better job of putting the focus on education. And as a teacher, I really value when someone can combine the medium of education with the storytelling device of anime. And while I didn't actually watch Cells at Work directly, and instead absorbed it tangentially through my roommate viewing it back in college, I did watch Cells at Work Code Black. And you get the vibe that something is wrong as soon as the opening plays. The thing about Code Black versus its origin series is that it's supposed to be darker than the original. Not edgier, per se, though it does present that way sometimes, but generally darker. This isn't a normally functioning human body, this is a body falling apart at the seams. The body is an alcoholic, it has erectile dysfunction, it's balding and developed ulcers due to stress. So seeing the toll that takes on anthropomorphized cells is supposed to feel harrowing, and it does achieve that sometimes. You see the toll this body takes on its liver cells, and the cells that die off from increased stomach acid levels, and the scene where the main character realizes that the sperm cells probably were just jacked off into a tissue and their life is over as soon as it begun is deeply disturbing in an impactful way. And yet, still, the anime adaptation is overall just so sterile, pun intended, yet again. Almost as if the show wanted to appeal to every audience that enjoyed the original, but also appeal to the hardcore, edgy crowd. And what this culminates in is something that's just frankly generic, a blatant rehash of what came before, but more tonally dissonant. It's not bad, but it is plain. We've seen how this sort of thing plays out before, you don't need to make it more harrowing. I will say the main Blood Cells character arc about learning to make the most of living in this horrible body, despite being pushed to his breaking point multiple times, is engaging and makes you reflect on what your own actions in real life do to your body. I wouldn't be surprised if there were stories of people watching this and using it as a jumping point to try and overcome their smoking addiction. Yet still, I can't get past this confusion about who this show is for. I don't think audiences that like the vivid world of the original would necessarily be drawn to this bleaker variant, but this show is also not distinguishable enough from the original series to draw in anyone who skipped the base series. It's just a weird show to exist, and while I do think it has its merits, it doesn't leave a lot on the table to look forward to. I guess you could say these past two entries on this list are black to black. Get it? Like back to... Like, I gotta fill time on this one because Darker Than Black is one of those shows that if I watched it more recently, I would probably not remember watching it at all. That shouldn't speak to the quality of the show, but more so how little of an impact it leaves on the viewer, or at least left on me. I know lots of people still look back on this show fondly, one of the prime examples of unique early 2010s Japanimation that takes pre-existing concepts and radically builds upon them. But for me, Darker Than Black drops the ball on a lot of what I was originally looking for. I think the power system is very interesting and avoids falling into the superhero genre. Superheroes are fine, and there are some great shows and films that build themselves around a super society, but Darker Than Black never treats its specially powered characters like superheroes or even as mutants. It feels like a hidden other world that you have to peel back the page to find, and I think that's a really fine line to ride that this show handles excellently. Though, I do admit I wish I could have seen more utilizations of these cool powers, instead of the same few getting most of the attention throughout the series. I also think world building is solid, which is great because that's one of my favorite aspects of fantastical worlds and premises. But just like with the power system, it doesn't quite get there for me. And I think the gap that sticks out the most in my mind is that of the characters. I never really cared about any of them. Hei has intriguing motivations, but he comes across as a blank slate a lot of the time, and I never felt a connection with him as our protagonist. Yin is a classic must-protect kudere, and Suo is a nice change of pace in the sequel series, but again feels kind of bland in contrast to some of the more impactful side characters. This is definitely a show I can see being something I enjoy more now, rather than what I would have liked watching as a 16-year-old, so maybe a rewatch is in order after this whole project is done, actually. Give it a shot if you think the sci-fi superpowers subgenre is up your alley. I think there's something here to really like, really sink your teeth into, even if I myself didn't get much out of it almost a decade ago. You know, I've been cursing a lot more in this video than I have the past two, but seriously, how the fuck did this get this high on this list? We are at the point where I'm actively recommending these shows to at least certain groups of audiences, but who the hell do I recommend Future Diary to? Okay, let's start with the bad, get that out of the way. The main character puts Wonder Bread to shame with how milquetoast he is. Just a little whiny bitch baby bitch boy the whole time. Although, you know, you can't exactly blame him given the circumstances. Similar to Dead Man Wonderland and Batum, this is up there in the echelons of shows that were edgy and cool and mature when we were all 12 years old. But in reality, it's low-tier thrills with more curse words, blood, and nudity. That's it. Characters vary from interesting and genuinely well written to some of the most contrived and tropey and irritating people put to screen. You would think after the main characters are betrayed by every single diary user, they would stop trusting the new diary users they meet. The animation is mildly above average at best, but has some high points of decent Sakuga. That scene of Yuno beheading all the acolytes on the bridge stands out in my mind, though admittedly that may just be because of the number of times I've seen it reposted. Alright, let's talk about the murderous elephant in the room. Yuno Gasai is a very, very important character, essentially pioneering the yandere craze that was on the rise in the 2010s and has morphed into the I can fix her mentality of the modern day. She is the focal point of the show, and while I'm not the target audience for that kind of love story, they put their all into making Yuno stay in your mind. This image is burned into my mind a decade after I originally watched it. The scene where she pulls an axe out from under her mattress minutes after making love to Yuki is iconic and lives rent-free in my head. Yuno is an icon, and she is the best and worst part of this show. You are going to go into Future Diary and either hate it because of Yuno or love it because of Yuno. I'm definitely more in the former camp. That sort of relationship just makes me feel queasy, but you cannot deny Yuno's staying power. And if the show didn't have her, no one would watch it. Some traits of this show that stand out are its unique applications of the death game genre. Keep in mind, this was around the time of the Hunger Games craze, so having a death game that brings things into the modern, real-world setting made it a perfect fit for audiences at the time to get more of their fill. We've had dozens of death game adaptations since then that base their stories around what Future Diary created, and the way that all of the diaries act differently is actually really cool and keeps you invested. You want to know what the next opponent's ace up their sleeve is. Also, I want to shout out the one character in the show that actually compelled me to keep watching it. Minene starts out as rough and uncomfortable to watch as Yuno in many ways, but her arc is so developed compared to the others in this series that it almost feels like the original creator wanted her to be the focus, but unfortunately decided to aim it toward high schoolers because, well, that's what you do in anime, I guess. She's not the most incredible character ever, but she is one that I fondly remember from the show that I'm not all that fond of. Overall, I guess Future Diary does have stuff in here for some audiences. The stigma that surrounds it simultaneously is justified and overplayed. I think this show is perfect for anyone who wants to relive that kind of teenage angst that so many of us experience that I think has morphed into something totally different in this generation. Future Diary today would be a far cry from what it was 10 years ago. It's a time capsule of a series that reflects the desires of the people that watched it at the time when it was peak mature fiction for them. Also, yeah, I guess if you enjoy yandere shit, you can't skip this one. It belongs here at the bottom 30, but no lower. I will begrudgingly accept that.